We're 8 days off of the election, and so time's getting close, and I'm sure many of you are getting the telephone calls and the things in the mail and things stuffed in your front door from candidates looking for your vote. So what we want to talk about tonight is what your rights are as a voter and a voter with a disability, primarily, because there are a lot of obstacles if you decide to go to the polls. There's a lot of obstacles. If you decide to vote absentee, there's also a lot of obstacles, and one of those right now is time. And so, especially for absentee balloting. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Disability Rights Connecticut. Some of you may know, we used to be the affiliated with the state, and we were the protection and advocacy organization with the state of Connecticut. In about 2016 or 17, they spun us off into a nonprofit organization, and we have been working ever since. We have about 20 persons on staff, including advocates and attorneys, of which I am one. We are a legal advocacy organization. We're like a law firm. We're dedicated to identifying and eliminating barriers for people with disabilities when it comes to their civil, legal, and human rights. Basically, what we're in place for is to make sure that persons with disabilities have the same rights and access to their civil, legal, and human rights as everyone else. As I said, we're an independent nonprofit organization. We get the majority of our money from federal funding. A whole bunch of different funds that come through the federal government are used to fund our organization. We have specialized funding for abuse and neglect of disabled people. We have special funding for voting and encouraging voting among persons with disabilities. And we have developmental disabilities, seniors, all those groups are included in the funding that we get. Our main purpose is to improve the quality of life for people with disabilities and their families and our entire community. When we make sure that we improve the quality of life for disabled persons, we are in fact improving the quality of life for our communities. DRCT's mission is to educate, is to educate and advocate for people in the state of Connecticut in all areas of their lives to make sure that they have equal treatment and equality with other individuals in the community. We want to make sure that we cover all types of disabilities, whether they're mental disabilities, physical disabilities, it doesn't matter. Those are our mandates, and those are the requirements that are established by federal law. I want you to know that if you request information, if you request services from DRCT, you're going to get a response. You're going to get an information and referral. You're going to get possibly representation. You're going to possibly get referrals to other organizations that are more appropriate for your issue. We tend to focus on systemic advocacy for people with disabilities. What this basically means is if we have a group of people who are being mistreated, being discriminated against, being treated differently, we will make sure that we focus on the groups who will have the most impact on making sure to rid the system of that discrimination. So many times we don't always have the capacity to represent people on individual cases. But if we find that, for instance, people in a certain nursing home, certain hospital, a certain facility are being treated differently, are being discriminated against, are not getting the services everyone else is getting, we're more likely to take a case like that than we are an individual case. But we'll make sure that you get information and referrals to deal with your matter. What we do, information referrals, what I just talked about, depending on the needs. We will connect callers to advocacy groups, legal teams, staff, or make referrals to other agencies. We monitor and investigate, and this is part of what I am very involved with, and that's that there are institutions around the state which house large numbers of people with disabilities, be they autistic, be they mental health, be they developmental or intellectual disabilities. These folks are in institutions, some very large institutions, and we get reports regularly about problems, failure to provide services, and in some cases, abuse and neglect. And so we send teams out to various institutions around the state to investigate and monitor the situations to see what is actually going on and what is not going on that should be going on. We then will prepare written reports, file it with the institution itself, and also file it with either the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services or with the Department of Disabilities and Developmental Disabilities, or the Department of Public Health, whoever is the appropriate agency in that facility. We will make sure that we make reports and make demands for correction of those problems that occur in the agencies. Systemic advocacy is as I explained earlier, is about using our limited resources to impact large numbers of people. Remember, the first thing is to use our services, you have to be disabled. And either, again, mentally, physically, somehow disabled. And we're looking for underserved or unserved groups. We know that we have unserved groups in the Spanish-speaking community. We have that in the Black and Brown community. We have that in immigrants and refugees and in other situations. So if we have ethnic or racial majorities or geographic regions that are being denied equal access and equal services, those are the types of cases we will focus on. And in Connecticut, as in a lot of other states, there's several big cities that tend to absorb all the services. And we need to make sure that areas other than Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, the people in the other parts of the state that need services get services. And that's one of the things we focus on primarily. In addition to providing the information referral, we can provide trainings like this, and we do trainings all over the state upon request in any one of our focus areas. And if you believe you or your group could benefit from this, I've got my information at the end of this training, and you can certainly contact us and we can certainly arrange something for your group or your organization to do that. Finally, here's a bunch of areas where we unfortunately don't practice. And again, it's because we're limited to disability, and it's because we are prohibited under a lot of our federal grants from representing people in certain areas. We can't do criminal law. We can't do family law. But again, you know, we do things like guardianships or conservatorships, and although that's not family law and that's more probate, it certainly affects the family, and a lot of what we do affects the family. And we end up dealing in many situations with people who are under guardianships or conservatorships, whose parents or family members are the ones that we primarily deal with because of either the inability to speak or the inability to make decisions for themselves. And that's primarily what DRCT does. And I'm going to try and get myself on the screen, but I'm not always so certain how I'm going to do that. Nope, that certainly wasn't it. In any event, we want to talk now about, wait, I guess first of all, I should ask, is there any questions about disability rights in general, Disability Rights Connecticut, our organization in general? Be happy to answer anything.
Do people need any sort of documentation, to require the services?
No, if you come in and tell us you are disabled, we're going to take your word for the fact that you are disabled, and we are going to help you to resolve whatever your issue is. We don't require basically anything. We don't require any proof of any of those things. We will take your word for it, and we will proceed as if you are. Because in many situations, even though people are not disabled, they're treated like they're disabled because of something physical, because of something mental, because of the way they talk, because of any other reason. So it's not only just actual disabled people, but those who are perceived and treated as though they are disabled.
Thank you so much.
Sure. And our offices right now, I should note that our offices are still under COVID, under the COVID plan, whatever that is, where most of us are working from home and very few people are working in the office. However, if you call the number that you'll see at the end of this, and you will get to somebody immediately, and you will either get referred to our intake line, or you will get referred to myself or another attorney or advocate at DRCT to answer your questions. And it may be a callback, but we will get in touch with you, and we will make sure that your issue gets addressed. Anything else? Okay, let's move on to voting. Well, one of the things that we are especially concerned about, and we have one project which is funded under the federal government funding, and that is our protection and advocacy in voting for persons with disabilities. And again, I'm a little. Is there any way I can get on screen?
Do you mean to stop the presentation?
No, just to put myself on the screen instead of a little square.
Yeah, you have to stop your presentation by clicking stop share.
Okay, all right.
There you go.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm such a non-technology person. Anyway, somebody once said that you have to vote as though your life depends on it, because it does. Disability vote can make a huge difference when we're talking about issues like creating more competitive employment. We have a lot of people in this state who are in facilities, but are working with BSR or working with the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation in trying to develop skills, develop employment skills, and become employed. And unfortunately, in the state, the number of people who are actively doing that and actively been given that opportunity is quite small. And also, in many situations, people are being put into jobs which are far below what their level of abilities and competencies are. And we work very diligently to try and make sure that if people want educational opportunities or want employment opportunities, that we can get people those opportunities. And, you know, voting is one of the ways that people can get people into office who are going to make sure that we have effective representation for people who are disabled. There was a study out of Rutgers University which said that if all persons who are disabled would vote to the same extent as the general population, that what we would end up having is we would end up having about 2.35 million more votes. And those votes could make a huge difference in local, regional, state, and federal elections. Americans with disabilities are the largest minority in the United States. And if you wish to vote, you certainly can vote. The only people who cannot vote are felons in prison who have not been given the right to vote again, or they are persons who the court has determined are not competent to vote. I can tell you, and the experience in the state of Connecticut is that virtually no judge takes away the voting rights of a person just because they're under a guardianship or a conservatorship. If you want to vote, you have the two options of voting, and those options are that you vote in person at your voting place, and if not, you can vote by absentee ballot. Now, the concern about absentee ballot right now for this election is the time is getting short. It used to be that you would mail in a request for a absentee ballot, that they'd mail you the form for the absentee ballot. You would fill it out, sign it, do all these things you have to do regarding signing and information and the like. And then you'd send it back and you'd get a ballot. We got 8 days left before the next election, so that's not really going to be an option for a lot of people to do, except that, as Rachel said, you can do on-site registration for voting at this point. You can go to your town clerk's office or any number of places where they have the request for absentee ballot and fill out those forms and do it on a very quick basis. However, mailing back and forth may not, as I said, be appropriate at this point, given what's going on. Another thing that is incredibly important is that in healthcare laws are changing, as we know, just like voting laws and other laws are changing in between elections. And because they're changing, what happened during COVID is not happening now. And so there are different people and different laws that are in effect at this point, and being, up on what those laws are going to be very important. So we need people to vote in order to get people into office who are going to share our values and share our concerns about persons with disabilities. So if you want to vote in person, you can go into your polling place, bring a picture ID with your name and address on it. Now, you must bring the picture ID if it's your first time voting. If it's your second, third, and you're already registered, you can bring a utility bill, you can bring a bank statement, anything with your name and address on it. But it has to be a picture ID if it's your first time. You have the right to an accessible voting place. And an accessible voting place means that you have the right to have a polling place which has accessible parking, has temporary ramps or permanent ramps to allow people with wheelchairs to get in. You have the right to ask someone to help you with your voting if you want help. And you can fill out your ballot by hand or by machine. Now, for people who are blind, people who are deafblind, people who need that kind of assistance, there is a machine in each of the polling places, which is there to allow you to vote, even if you can't see or if you have problems with your sight. Now, what the machine does is it talks to you, and you can do that on your own, or you can have somebody from the polling place assist you with it. The thing they cannot do is they cannot know what your vote is, nor can they tell you how to vote. Your voting is independent and confidential, whether you have a disability or don't have a disability. You need to make sure that you are making those requests if you go to the polling place, because what's going to happen is they're going to presume that you can do everything the same as everyone else unless you tell them that you need some help. Okay, so we want you to make sure that if you're going to go to the polling place, that you are knowledgeable about what you have the right to do. Okay, you have to make sure that you follow the instructions and bring your ID and your other information with you. You need to have you can bring someone with you if you'd rather have someone come with you to do the voting instead of having a member of the polling place help you to vote. Again, that person doesn't have the right to know how you vote or who you voted for, but that's up to you as to what you do with your the person that you bring with you. Now, you have the right to curbside voting. If you can't get out of your car, they can bring the ballot out to you and you have the right to do curbside voting. You also have the right to review a sample ballot and receive instructions about how to use the equipment for deaf and blind, primarily individuals. You have the right to request being put to the front of the line if you can't stand or you have problems standing for any periods of time. You can also ask for a chair to sit down if you want, and if the wait is going to be for an extended period of time. And you also have the right to use the ballot marking device, which we encourage you to use if you have any problems with reading the ballot or doing the ballot itself, the paper ballot. And that's, it used to be during COVID that absentee balloting was allowed for everyone in the state. You basically had to say you were sick or that you had a physical limitation, but they considered COVID to fulfill that requirement. Right now, you can vote absentee ballot if you're a member, active member of the armed services, that you'll be out of town on election day. Sickness prevents you from voting on election day, and there are emergency balloting, absentee balloting available for persons who are sick on the day of an election day. If you have religious beliefs that prevent you from voting, or if you're working at the polls or have a physical disability, you can get an absentee ballot. Now, you can also download, and I know that Rachel mentioned this as well, you can also download an application for the absentee ballot, both in English and in Spanish. And there is on the Secretary of State's website, there is a link to get you to those applications. And Rachel, did you say the library has a link on their webpage too?
Yes, and we have paper forms as well.
Okay, all right. So you have lots of opportunities to get an absentee ballot should you need one. And we encourage you that if you feel that you need one, that's what you need to do. You mark on that form what the reason is you feel that you need to have an absentee ballot. Of all the important factors, you have to sign on your application, you have to sign on an envelope, then you have to put everything into an envelope. Then you can go to the ballot, absentee ballot boxes that are in every community, usually right by town or city hall, and you can drop your ballot in there. But you need to make sure that you follow the instructions carefully when you're doing an absentee ballot. You have to fill out according to the instructions. In filling out the registration card for an absentee ballot, you need to indicate the reason, as I said, why you need an absentee ballot. And accommodations must be made for those who need assistance with voting, such as ballot marking devices, or there is a electronic voting option, very, very limited for people who need that option in order to be able to vote. Remember that you have the right to vote independently and privately, and that if you have a permanent disability, and this is important, if you have a permanent disability, you should ask the Register of Voters or the town clerk about obtaining a permanent absentee voter status, so you don't have to go through this application process every election period. All of this is especially important in looking at the election that's coming up this year. Lots of mayoral elections are coming up this year. Lots of school board, lots of town councils, city councils that are coming up this year. And with the ability to register on site, with the ability to do absentee balloting, you need to make sure that you take that opportunity to vote on behalf of people with disabilities. If you have any further questions for me at this point, I would be happy to answer any questions regarding voting at this point.
Do you know if people are physically disabled, unable to drive, if there is a resource to get rides to the polls?
We've had trouble with that every year. And we've had trouble with the fact that there are some organizations like the Elks and some others who have vans that can take people to and from the polling places. I'm not aware of any specific statewide organizations or anything that are doing that. However, people are beginning to advertise that kind of thing, and I've seen a couple of them thus far. So I would just keep your eyes and ears open. Contact your any groups you're affiliated with, churches, fraternal organizations, or any of those organizations, and they will normally either have somebody or they will make sure that they help you to find somebody to give your ride to the polls.
I have a question.
Yes.
I live in Bloomfield in
Yeah.
an elderly community. I have no idea who's running for office. I haven't received anything at all in the mail or anything.
Okay. Have you voted before
I always vote.
from that location?
Yes.
Okay.
No, from my voting place.
Okay, all right, but your address hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't in 2 years.
Okay, all right. And now that the COVID pandemic has been determined to be finished, they're not sending things out like they did previously. What you need to do is just to call your town clerk. You can give your town clerk your address. They can give you information on who's running, where your polling site is. And believe me, where your polling site is important because mine has changed 3 times in the last 3 elections. So if you just call your town clerk can give you that information right over the telephone.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
And
Sure.
if you have any problems with that, please call the library and we will help you.
Thank you.
There are some communities around the state in which they have the registrar of voters or the town clerk will hold community sessions for doing things like filling out the request for an absentee ballot or even signing up for voting signing up for voting on the voting registration card. Now Rachel said the library's got all of those, and so the library would be an ideal location to get that information if you haven't registered yet or you haven't done the absentee ballot application, excuse me. Anyone
Yeah.
else?
Just give us a call, let us know what you need, and we will be happy to help, whether it's, helping you find out if you are registered. We have all those links on our website, but if you're not sure how to do that, we'll be happy to walk you through it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful, and thank you for doing that to the library because that's a very important thing for individuals. When we go into facilities that have disabled folks who are basically limited to that facility and living in that facility, we always bring up the issue of voting. We always bring up the issue of being able to do absentee ballots, and we always encourage the local town clerks and the local registrar of voters to do a special session at those type of facilities to make sure disabled persons have the right to register to vote, get an absentee ballot if they can't get to the polls.
That's a great service. I believe the statistic is something like 55% of people actually vote who are able to vote. So we're trying to get the word out as well. So this is great what you do, Stephen, with your organization.
And again, if you have any questions whatsoever about about this, and you call the library is going to help you to do all of this and to get that information. You should also understand that if you have legal questions or if you run into problems, there are going to be a number of organizations statewide that you can contact if you get into a voting site and somebody says, I don't know how to use that machine, or we can't give you the machine, it's not turned on or it's not set up. The Secretary of State's office, the State Elections Enforcement Commission, and our office have all got access to the state to report problems with voting and to correct them while you're still there so you can vote. So, we will put those numbers up and make sure that you see what those numbers are. And if you have any problems, you should definitely give us a call. At our office, DRCT has a hotline which is open from the time the polls open until the time the polls close. And I can give you that number so that you've got it. If you need to call us, you can certainly call us. And that number is 860-856-8255. 4164. And we can help you with whatever problem you may have if it's on election day and you're at the polls. If you're voting by absentee ballot, you have to get that absentee ballot filed with the town clerk by the end of the election day. So by, I believe it's 8 p.m. it closes, and you have to have your absentee ballot in by that time in order for it to be counted to be part of the election returns. Is there anything further? Anything in general? Well, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for being here, and thanks for inviting us. Thank you, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Stephen. I think we learned a lot tonight. Thank you, Julie, for providing your services to us. And I will send out a follow-up email to everyone who registered for the program with all of this information. Stephen, in addition to the hotline, is there an email is it your email or another email for the organization I can give them?
You can send it directly to me. You have my email,
Yep.
so you can send it to me and I'll make sure it gets to where it should go.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for all the work that you do, Stephen, every day to educate us and to help people.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.